Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Unpolished Church podcast. I'm Jon Sherwood. Thanks so much for joining us. If you wouldn't mind, if you find this podcast helpful, please like and subscribe. Feel free to share it with a friend. Leave a comment below on what you think. Today, we're going to talk with a couple of my good friends and teammates here in the Asheville Church Network, James and Daniella Hatfield. They are going to be on here talking a little bit about spiritual formation and how formation has played a role in our network and our journey kind of stumbling upon these things and the impact that it's had. So James and Daniella, thank you so much for being here.
Good to be back.
Yep, here we go. Another round. Love it.
It's been a minute, man. I feel like we were on a steady clip there for a little bit and then life happened and jobs happened and we all got busy, but it's great to be here. You guys are some of my favorite guests.
Oh,
He says that to all the girls.
Oh, yeah. James, not so much, but Daniella definitely. So, so maybe we could just dive right in, or we could keep musing around for some other, things if you'd like, and talk a little bit about some of your favorite memories on the Unpolished podcast thus far. Let's do that.
No.
What's some of your favorite memories or most embarrassing moments? That would be fun to do.
Oh, when we were going to do it and then we didn't, and we got into the content. That was my favorite memory. It just happened right there.
Oh boy. All right. So ever as efficient as always. Daniella, how about you?
Oh, goodness. Well, the first one was funny because I'd never been on a podcast before. And James has been on many, 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 many podcasts. So he was trying to coach me during it. Like he would tap my leg but I was just confused. I didn't know what he wanted me to do. So I was all nervous. And I was sick and I was trying not to cough the whole time. So.
Oh yeah. That's always fun, recording a podcast when you're sick and you're trying not to cough all over the mic. Good times, good times. So, for those that may not be familiar or new listeners, perhaps, or maybe friends that have been invited to check out this podcast, we have been a traditional church that has, transitioned into this Microchurch network model, kind of away from the prevailing church model over the last 5 or 6 years. And we've been talking here on this podcast a little bit about that journey, some of the things that kind of caused us originally to head in that direction, and some of the things that we've learned, things that have been amazing and things that we probably would do differently if we were to do them again. And today I thought maybe we could just talk a little bit about the role that spiritual formation has had in our network, in our lives personally, our families, our leadership, and just kind of start dipping our toe in the water of that particular part of our journey and how it's connected to our journey of this decentralized small expression approach to church. So you guys just jump in, talk about formation for a minute.
So this is a very new idea to me. I mean, new meaning just in the past few years. It's probably some of the things that we mean when we say spiritual formation. It's not like I had never heard of them, but they were just stuff that other groups do that. And I don't, that's probably not for me but it's been pretty amazing. It's funny because it's new to me while actually it's incredibly old and traditional in one sense, but to me it feels fresh and I've never done this before. So.
Right. Yeah. And so maybe it's helpful to just start there of kind of defining terms and kind of outlining what we're talking about, because I think for many of us, the term spiritual formation was a bit unusual, obtuse. We didn't really have any frame of context for that of what exactly is that? And I think what we mean when we're talking about spiritual formation, or sometimes called spiritual disciplines or spiritual practices, is typically a very ancient way of engaging our walk with Jesus in our spiritual lives, our relationship with God in the Christian faith, can be formed and shaped by particular practices, by particular experiences, both individually and also communally. And so spiritual formation is us kind of learning, retrieving, engaging in some of these things that are actually quite ancient, that go all the way back to the desert fathers and mothers in the first few centuries of the Christian church, and have had more prominence in other traditions and other Christian denominational heritages throughout history. Some of the quote unquote high church traditions, Catholics being first and foremost, and then others, Eastern Orthodox, Episcopalians, Anglicans, some of these older traditions have this more as a prominent piece of their faith expression and the life of the body that they find themselves in. But for us, who come from more of a quote unquote low church tradition, the kind of evangelical American church, typically doesn't have a whole lot of this kind of embedded in its culture. And so for us, it's quite new, it's quite fresh, talking about the prayer of examen or prayer of examine, thinking about meditation practices, breathing practices, breath prayer, walking inside of a labyrinth. I mean, I think all of us saw a labyrinth for the first time like 2 years ago, but these are ancient practices, hundreds and hundreds of years old. And for us, they're like, oh, look, we just found a new candy store, let's check this out. And so just to kind of like let the hearer and the viewer in on kind of what we're meaning when we talk about spiritual formation. And the backstory there for us is some friends of ours, some family members kind of stumbled upon this about 8 to 10 years ago. And they were in a very dry place in their faith and in their spiritual life. And they were kind of just, I think, like a lot of people that we talk with, just kind of really like fed up with and just sort of over church and traditional church, and just felt like there was very little to no spiritual exuberance and life, and just, the well of Jesus seemed to have dried up quite a bit. And in this desert place, God, created some opportunities for them to basically experience some of these older practices and start to be around some people and groups that were more adept and had more, experience with these things. And it just completely refreshed them, revitalized their faith and their spiritual journeys. And so they started sharing it with other people and talking about it. And that was inevitably how it got really close and intimate with us. I had experience from the academy and from my scholarship and reading. I had touched on it, but I had never been in circles or communities that really practiced it a whole lot. And so about 4 or so years ago, we started kind of implementing this in our leadership and started trying to intentionally fast, started trying to have some intentional breath prayers. And then finally, we embarked about 4 or 5 years ago on having our first leadership spiritual formation retreat, which I think was like our real first like kind of dive into the pool. And maybe you guys can talk about that a little bit. Like, what do you remember from when we first started doing those formation retreats, which we've done every year now for the last 4 or 5 years? What do you remember? What was encouraging, refreshing? What was scary and weird and awkward and a bit like, just uncertain? Like, just talk about how you felt when you first started really diving into this.
I think we had the benefit of this wonderful couple that would take their time to introduce it to us, give us a bit of history about it, where it came from, and then slowly like ease us into the kiddie pool, of formation here. And we got to practice it. We just didn't read about it. It was like, all right, well, let's jump in and give it a shot. And because it was new for everybody, we were all like, well, let's experience this together. And some of the formations were something we've never done before. And we got to experience that as a community, as a group, and we got to dialogue about it. And after we did it, we got to reflect on it. So it was teach it and learn it, do it, reflect, and then go forth and use. So I think how it was introduced to us was really healthy. And it was done by a couple that was able to draw us out, ask good questions, affirm us in our feelings. And we felt that we were in a safe space to learn something new, and nobody felt like we all were a fish out of water. So it was good to do that together.
And this was in a like retreat setting, where we had carved out a few days to kind of go specifically do this together. Yeah. Go ahead, Daniela.
Yeah. So the main practice that I remember from early on was the breath prayers. That was one of the first ones we did, and we did a lot of them for a while. And I think it just really became a place, with practice, it became a place that was more accessible for me as a place to meet with God. But I remember the first few months of it, I would cry every time. Like, I would just find myself in tears, in whether I was participating in or trying to lead others through a breath prayer. And I think it was just a part of my soul that had been kind of malnourished or something for so long, that when it got a little bit of sunlight and water and air on it, it was just so, it wasn't sad tears. It was like tears of like God ministering to a vulnerable place for me. They were good tears, but it was just very emotional for me at first. But I'm and I still practice them, and it's not usually as emotional now necessarily, and maybe that's because that part of me has been ministered to now, and it's not as pitifully malnourished as it used to be.
Yeah, it's and to that point, right? Like, I think that's the whole idea of why we call it formation, because it's formative. It's forming us into something, and it's forming something in us. And as we, one of the kind of isms of many spiritual formation teachers and camps that I've ever been a part of or ever had intersection with always talk about spiritual disciplines and spiritual formation in and of itself is never the end goal. Like, they're only a conduit, a tool in which to help us draw nearer to and become more like Christ. And if spiritual formation or spiritual disciplines or spiritual practices, if anything we're doing isn't helping us to ultimately become more like Christ, then, why are we doing it? And I think that's a particular unique trap of spiritual formation, is that we can kind of become rote in doing these things. And that's maybe where some of our traditions have come from and kind of reacted, to some of these high church traditions, where it can seem like you're doing these things, but you don't really know why. You don't really know what they mean, or they're not connecting for you. But for us, that opportunity to actually experience something was also itself a new conduit of spiritual life and learning, especially. Like, we've all been to a lot of retreats, but they're mostly conferences. They're mostly learning environments where we are hearing from a speaker, they're talking to us, and we're taking notes, and we're engaging in concepts and ideas, but very little to no like experiential opportunities to actually like do something. That I know that's been kind of the predominant mode and modality of how I have been a part of conferences or retreats or Christian sort of efforts. And this one, I think, was different in that it was quite inverted. Like, we were still learning some things, but it was heavily experiential. It was like you said, James, like, okay, we're going to talk about breath prayers. We're going to kind of talk about it, understand it, talk about its origins, talk about its connections with the Christian faith and the Christian church. And then we're going to do it, or the prayer of examen, or, walking a labyrinth and praying through a labyrinth, or, whatever it might be, in Visio cards, or whatever. Like, there were these experiences that, frankly, I just would probably never do on my own in my day to day. And so for me, my introduction into formation was through the academy, through reading books, through learning. And so I had read, Teresa of Avila, I had read St. John of the Cross, I had read Ignatius and Brother Lawrence. And, I would kind of like dabble around with it a little bit on my own. I kind of went on this like quasi half-cocked silent retreat sort of on accident one time by myself, because I wasn't in environments where anyone else was doing anything like that. So I was literally just walking in the dark. But then I remember when we started doing this, it was like, oh, I have an opportunity to actually experience this, not just read about ideas and how other people have thought about it and practice it, but I actually get to practice it. And I get to do that in a community of other people while being guided, as you were mentioning, James, by some people who were just very loving and gentle and had some experience and exposure in doing this. And that completely changed my understanding and frameworks and integration with anything about spiritual formation up to that point. And now here we are, several years later, and we're beginning to try to share this with others and put on, formation retreats for other people. And the responses have just been overwhelmingly amazing. And so as we are talking about this and formation, I want to kind of keep that in the background and maybe pivot just a little bit to talk about how formation has begun to form not only us as leaders, but our network, right? And the network that we're a part of. How would you respond to that? Like, if I were to ask you, how do you see spiritual formation impacting or intersecting with our network? What would you say? Like, what has been some of the good? What's been some of the it's kind of clunky and sticky? What comes to your mind as you think about the integration of formation into our larger network and ecosystem and culture of how we're doing church?
So we've been taking the church through John Mark Comer's Practicing the Way, going through different practices, one of them being a prayer practice and different ways to experience God in prayer. And for me personally, at the beginning of the year, I started practicing listening prayer, which is basically making myself available and listening, and really not doing it in a way that concoct something or force anything, or just sit and listen. And so I started making myself available for listening prayer beginning of the year, and just would go outside and stand and listen. And frankly, I got a lot of nothing many times because I didn't want to force it. I was like, I'm not.
So when you say listen, though, like I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody who is listening to this, and they know, we all know what we mean when we say they're listening to this. But when you say you go outside and you're listening, what does that mean? Can you describe that? Like, are you listening for birds? Are you listening for trees? Are you listening for an audible voice of God? Like, what, when you say you go outside and just stand and try to listen, maybe extrapolate on that a bit, like expound on that. What does that mean? And how are you thinking about that?
First, I didn't know. Like, it was just a thing I read in a book. Like, all right, let's go for it. Like I'm into new things. I'm into being informed, so I would go out, and sometimes I was just like, there are the birds and there is the wind. But I was just, I didn't know what I didn't know. Kind of like, you're like fish. I'm just trying. Here I am, God, but I did tell God, like, hey, I'm here to listen for what you might want to be doing. And I want to be humble to whatever could happen from this. And I'm open and okay if it's nothing, like that I'm just standing out here for 15 minutes and getting some fresh air. And I'm okay with that. I just didn't want to force anything. And then after weeks of doing it, I got a little nudge, a little voice, it wasn't audible. It was just a little nudge of like, hey, go back into the hospice. And so Danielle and I, prior to COVID, and our family and some of our college students and young professionals would go into hospice where people are on their last day and families are there, and we would go room to room and we would sing. And when COVID came, it shut that down. And even after that, we went through Hurricane Helene here in Asheville, and the hospice where we would sing was not available to us. But in that moment, earlier this year, when I got the nudge of what I felt God saying, you need to head back there, I then tested that by asking other people. And the first person I said that to is Daniella. And usually she's very I'm like, I think God is calling us to go back into hospice and start a church in hospice. And I'm like, that's what I feel like I'm hearing. And she is usually hesitant to change. And she's like, that sounds awesome. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Well, let me put this before others in the church. So we started talking to our kind of leadership groups, and okay, that sounds good. And then we put it before the church, and before you know it, we are starting a church in hospice about 4 months ago. And we're bringing church to people on their last day. And, we're like, hey, if you want to have anyone come and join us, we're just open. We're not going to go and just really force it. And then God brought some other folks, and we started going back into hospice once a month, teaching or singing. And God is definitely in the building. We continue to do it to this day. Our kids are with us. And, on paper, if you're looking at how do we grow the church and do all these things, and the fundamentals of like, maybe this doesn't work on a financial level, it doesn't really work on an outreach level. It has no, on paper, it doesn't look that.
There's no ROI, huh?
No ROI, return on investment is, but the return on Jesus is in the building. Like, now that we've been doing it, and so he's saying it's okay, come and experience. And it has blossomed a few other things. We might talk about that later on the episode today. But I have found through the practice of listening prayer for this formation that it changed where my family heads and our church, as we multiply the microchurches, we're going into new spots. So it has definitely had an impact directly on our personal family, on our friends and some community people have joined us on the hospice facility that we are partnering with, and then in the church on the whole. So so far, we'll keep you posted. We're still in the beginnings of this, but so far it's been incredible, and I wouldn't change a thing.
Well, one of the things that has occurred is that this new microchurch and our network and our ecosystem was birthed out of a calling from God that was allowed to occur through a practice of listening prayer, which each of those things are like really new for any of us. It's not like some leader going, hey guys, I got a plan and you need to go over here and do this. And we should start an outreach over there. Or you have singing skills. Why don't you go sing to people on their deathbeds in hospice? Rather, it is someone perceiving and sensing a calling from God and the Holy Spirit. And then, in community, sort of verifying that calling and discerning that calling, and then going and doing what God is calling you to do in the world. And obviously, James, you're a musician, a guitar player, and a singer. You're a great worship leader. So you have these skill sets and giftings, right, to be able to bless others. And you've had some experience in the past of doing this at hospice and some relational connections there. But it just seemed like you were really feeling like this is where God wants us to go and minister. And who knows, maybe a church can be birthed and formed in this environment where people are, literally dying, and their families and their friends, and sometimes, many times, all alone. Maybe you guys can talk about that for a minute. Just talk about how you have seen God, how you've met Jesus as you've responded to his calling to go to this microchurch. You mentioned that God is in the building, when you go and those kinds of things. Talk about that. Maybe share a story or two for the audience and just what your experience has been like there.
Yeah. I mean, every time we go, we just come back overflowing with stories and people's faces and, holding people's hands and, family members, often in tears and understandably. And, we've had, one gentleman, I remember he was kind of laying in the bed. Like, we weren't sure if he was awake, but we went in and started singing softly. And then he looked up and he started just waving his arms around and conducting us. And he had this big smile on his face. And, he was clapping at the end and so much joy. It's surprising to me when we go how much joy is there. We feel the joy of being able to serve and give and we feel so honored to be allowed into such a vulnerable and sacred time in someone's life that we would even be invited into the room at such a time and be allowed to offer a gift of music. And but yeah, we sing Amazing Grace a lot. It's our theme song there. And almost every time we sing it, a family member will say, that's Daddy's favorite song. That's why we sing it so much, because it's everyone's favorite song. And it just reaches back. We've talked with people who you could tell they were having a hard time having a conversation, like they couldn't think of the words. Their memory was just gone. But we start singing, man, and those words just come right back to them, and they're singing along with us. And that memory's still in there about God's amazing grace. And we're so grateful to be able to be in there sharing that with people. We sometimes sing in the bigger sort of common room as well. And we had some family members, they could hear us out in the hall. So they came hustling down the hall and came in, and they were starting to cry, and they were like, it's just so good to hear people worshiping God here. And oh my gosh. Okay. So many stories.
Thank you. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. As a worship leader, you can imagine you're behind microphones, you got bands and drums and tons of people. And that's one form of collective worship that I really enjoy and appreciate and love. It's another front row, and, the wife is holding the husband and he's gasping for air and she's crying her eyes out, and you're singing Amazing Grace over them. Or the family member just died in the room and they open the door because they want to hear us sing Amazing Grace while they're experiencing a front row seat in death. It's every time amazing stories, whether someone's by themselves or a room full of people, which is always interesting in itself, just walking in to someone solo or walk in when the whole family's in there and everybody's in tears, or they're singing along with hands in the air and they're just, right there with you in step. And I'm like, well, this is a different type of worship experience that I think just really pleases him. And, I love singing people into their final breath. And I've really enjoyed, like Daniella said, the vulnerability of the moment. And we always are getting more than we give. I mean, his words are always true, that it's far greater to give than receive. And I've truly experienced that every time we're singing from room to room.
So I'm just sort of pausing to take this in because I've had a chance to do this with you guys before. Before COVID, I haven't had a chance to join you in this newer iteration, but it is so powerful, and something, death is something I think in our modern context that we are usually quite inundated from and like kind of like bubble wrapped and protected from. And so it can be quite jarring, most people have very rarely seen a dead body. And if they have, it's usually been, conditioned and treated and poured over in such a way to kind of present it in the most lifelike way possible and all these sorts of things. And there are people dying all around us, just completely and utterly alone with no one by their sides, perhaps no relationship left in their life that is positive potentially. Maybe you can talk a little bit about just how you have seen God, like how you've experienced God and how you've experienced Jesus and your Christian faith as you go into these environments that are, fairly unusual, fairly unique. Like you mentioned, they're incredibly vulnerable. I would imagine people in the medical field also, Danielle, I know you're also a nurse. And so I know that certain jobs and vocations put you nearer and around death more than others. But maybe you can talk a little bit about just how going into this very specific environment with the hopes of bringing the light and love and companionship of God and Jesus into these environments, how you have met Jesus there.
Yeah, well, since we always sing Amazing Grace, we take time. Those of us who are going to hospice, we gather up at the front of the building. They have this beautiful chapel. So we gather there before we go sing. And we've just been slowly working our way through Amazing Grace. And we'll just take a few of the lines and spend time quietly meditating on them. Some people may use them as a breath prayer. They're such familiar words that you can just sing them without even thinking. But I remember the first time we did it, right? It starts off, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And connecting with words like that, connecting with what does that mean about God? What does grace sound like? What is the sweet sound of grace? And then our own wretchedness and his love despite our undeserving. So I think, we're really trying to go and not just do the thing or, okay, we did it. We sang some songs in some rooms, but I think even while we're there, we're all really trying to listen, because we have no idea what we're going to walk into each time, but listen to the Holy Spirit. Like, what do these people need? What did we need to stop and pray with them? Do they need a hug? Do they need to step out in the hall and talk? And so I think just trying to really be there with God and not just do our activity while we're there.
Yeah, trying to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit and the needs around you. It's great. How about for you, James?
Yeah, that awareness of walking in the room, knowing that, okay, let's see what God has prepared for us. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's family members that want to share stories about the person in the bed who is not cognizant, and they just want to tell about their life and what they did and memories. And other times people that are in the bed are very aware, and they're looking at. We have bring our children there, so it's a very full circle moment of a young kids in with someone maybe 80s or 90s, and this is it for them, and watching them look at our children and smile. Sometimes it's about that connection where they get to really connect with the kids, where they get to sing along and enjoy, like Daniella was saying earlier, where the words just come out. Other times where the person's like, "Hey, don't leave yet," and so we've got to come up with, okay, what do we need to do? And my oldest daughter, she's great on the guitar and singing, and she'll come and sing a verse right to the person, and might be a very old. We had one birdie, who after she wanted a second song, our daughter goes and sings thank you guys, and then just as we're walking out the door, I love you guys. You're like, man, that's incredible, and just that moment in time to really connect with the family, with the individual, and also the staff. Sometimes staff is in there, like taking vitals or doing things, and we don't always sing Amazing Grace. It's a majority song, but sometimes if it's a younger person, you hate to see when it's a teenager in the bed, or it's someone you can tell might not appreciate Amazing Grace as much, so it might sing a modern song, and but also how it can touch the staff and how it brightens up the staff who we see over and over again as we come in. So it creates that sense of connection, because we're not just going in at Christmas or Thanksgiving or a holiday, but the consistency of it, I think, is super powerful for the people that are there. And then we're also bringing in gifts. We've asked the staff, like, what can we bring? What does the family need? So we have a little gift bag for each room that we go in. And there's just we're still finding more and more ways to serve and to give as much as we can while we're there. But, when they have these little pink lights, when someone dies, the pink light will go above their room. And you can see sometimes the family members are walking around, and this one younger gal is just in full tears and almost like looking for us, and we're like, oh, do you need a song? And she's like, I don't know. And then we just formed a circle around her, like, can we pray for you? And we prayed, and she told us a little story about her mother, who she's named after, and she just sat there and wept as we prayed over her. So we kind of stay on our toes for like, oh, Holy Spirit, what do you want? And what do we do in the moment? And we try to listen and give. And typically God knows exactly what the folks need, and it turns out to be fantastic most every time.
Yeah. So you mentioned your kids, joining you, and obviously I know you and your kids very well, and you've got 4 kids, ranging from, what is Hazy now? 7, 6?
6 to 14.
6 to 14. And they're all there every time. And as we do Microchurch, our kids are with us, usually in some form or capacity, and usually they're right there with us. But that's also pretty unusual, for anybody, but especially for kids, to be in that kind of environment and to do it regularly, and for it to be so intimately and closely, explicitly connected to their parents' faith, that like daddy heard from God that we need to go do this. And so now we're going to do this type of thing. Like that's obviously a lot for a child to take in. Maybe you guys can talk a little bit about that for a moment, just what it's been like for you as you've been a part of this kind of smaller microchurch expression with your kids. And now most recently, this microchurch at Hospice being birthed out of a time of listening prayer and calling from God, and kind of what it's been like for them, and some of the unique opportunities and some of the unique challenges as well.
Yeah. So our kids, they don't know any different, but, I think of maybe my experience growing up of Sunday school, and it was like, oh, we're going to cater to these kids and make it super fun for them. And I mean, you can't really get much more opposite of that than, okay, we're going to go to this place where everyone's like sick and dying and sing to them. And there aren't going to be any other kids there, but we're going to go serve and love these people. It's such a different experience. But I mean, they've really been amazing. So like James mentioned, we used to go there years ago. So when my 14-year-old was 3 and 4 years old, and we always I walk in usually with a younger child first, like, hey, can we sing you a song? And because most people like little kids, but our oldest, who's a beautiful singer now, could not carry a tune, but she was enthusiastic, by golly. So we'd get in there and she would be right up front, just singing so loud and off key, but just so joyful. And so they've kind of
stage spotlight from the beginning, huh?
They've kind of grown up in it in some ways. But yeah, like you mentioned, I'm a nurse, and I think, like you said, our culture, death is so invisible or just kind of tucked away. And I'm really grateful that our kids are able to connect and see that part of life regularly. I think it's a real gift for them.
I think our children are very adaptable and also very naive as well. Like adaptable, like we've come in rooms and they're just like, wow. I mean, it's almost like they know what to do. You know what I mean? Like you throw our dog in the water and he can swim. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain things that are just kind of built in and they just adapt and it's perfect. Like, I'm like, wow, like I don't know, maybe there's something deep inside of us that just knows that this is a respectful moment and we need to give right now, and that we are aware of death, even maybe from a young age, that there's a time to pass and that there's an honor and a respect just given where I don't remember really ever correcting our kids in a room. We're like, hey, you can't do that. You can't touch this. Or they've, even from jump, have done great. Other times, like in the great room, when they're unaware, where we're singing and now they're dancing on the stage and they're making tons of, and then they're unaware, and so then we have to kind of pause and say, okay, like, as people are walking by somber, you can't be the one on the stage, like just kicking it and like having the time of your life. Like, so there's that naivety that you're just like, all right, I love you. So it's so cute and beautiful. And so we have to teach at some moments, but I think on the whole though, it's almost like it's built in. It's really amazing to see how God wires us up for whatever might be ahead of us, even if they're a super young kid. I've been so encouraged by that.
Daniella, it's interesting that you mentioned just the difference in your experience growing up in a kind of a prevailing model church and Sunday school for kids, and the paradigm being trying to kind of make church attractive for children, to the point where, this is some years ago now, but I remember going inside of a big mega church in Atlanta. I mean, when I say mega, I mean 10,000 plus. And there was this whole huge building just for the kids. And I remember walking in and there were 15 flat screens in a row on this giant wall. And there were PlayStations underneath every single one of them. And I was just like, man, what kid wouldn't want to come here? You know what I mean? But for what reason are they coming, and all of that. And so thinking about this, if I'm trying to put myself back to my 8, 10, 12, 14-year-old self, walking into a hospice because my parents want to go love and sing about Jesus to people on their deathbeds. I mean, wow, what a different experience. You talk about an experiential framework. It's not just I'm hearing about Bible stories of David slaying Goliath and Noah with his ark and the twosies, but wow, I'm the experience of my parents' faith, at least, and how formative that can be on their faith and their worldview of what's truly valuable, of what really matters the most. And that's what I think about when I think about your microchurch and hospice, is the value and the honoring of the Imago Dei in people that maybe have no one else around them to honor them in any other way other than perhaps a state sanctioned, bed and roof over their head. But I just think, wow, I don't know that you can get much closer to the heart of Jesus, than that kind of idea. And for our kids to be able to experience that and see that, I gotta think that just is so pleasing to God and so honoring of his creation and his other image bearers. And so, as I'm thinking about this and kind of wrapping up this episode and bringing this plane in for a landing, I wanted to ask you, for the person out there that's hearing this and hearing us talk about formation and calling and hearing from God and wanting to go be with God and do the work that God has prepared in advance for us to do. What advice would you give on how could someone else lean into and try to figure out God's calling in their life? How would you advise or counsel someone who's like, man, I'm really wanting to have a calling from God that I can go do something in the world to be about his mission of bringing about new creation? What kind of first steps, would you tell them and talk to them about? And what would you go back and tell yourself if you had the opportunity when you were first going out there, James, in your backyard for 15 minutes or whatever? How might you guys advise someone just exploring, trying to hear from God or discern his calling on their life?
I brought it with me. I came across this quote the other day. It's actually from Aristotle, who's not from a Christian tradition, but has said some wise things. It made me think of this idea of calling.
He's influenced Christian traditions, though, actually quite a lot. And he influenced a lot of big Christian thinkers like Augustine.
So he said, at the intersection where your gifts, talents, and abilities meet a human need, therein you will discover your purpose. And that really resonated with me. Your gifts, talents, and abilities meet a human need, not just a selfish, I like doing this,
or it makes me grand in the human stage.
Right. But has God given you a particular interest, talent, ability that could meet a need that you can find a purpose there, And so I think that that's a place to start. Listening for calling, listening for, is Jesus calling me? I'm probably not called to go engineer bridges because I'm not that great at math. You don't want to drive on that bridge. But what has God given me? And is there a match between that gift and a way to serve people?
Yeah, I really like that. I think put yourself around people that are doing it, right? You don't have to force it. Sometimes it's okay to be in the stands and watch for a little bit. Then it's okay to get down on the court and see what it's like to walk around on it. Then maybe you might play a game and, put yourself around it, and you don't have to force it too much. You know what I mean? But if you put yourself in situations where you're seeing other people using their gifts to meet other human needs, and they're like, oh, that's interesting, and learning more about yourself, right? I think sometimes if we make it and force it, that it doesn't always fit. That said, if you take a swing, man, and it doesn't work, you have some patience with yourself. It's okay. I think God can work with someone who wants to take a few swings and, try to get to know him and experience him. I think that's beautiful as well. I think that sometimes when I've felt nudged, I'm like, oh, here I go, God. I'm listening. I'm following your voice. Here we go. And I'm doing the things. I come to find out later on that someone's like, oh, I'm so grateful you're here. I've been praying for somebody that would come along. And you're like, oh, I'm answering someone else's. God sees me answer someone else's prayer. This has nothing to do with my nudge or my thing or whatever I thought was so important. And I think that's also super humbling in a good way. You're like, oh, wow, we're meant to kind of work together sometimes on a few of these things. So it's not so scripted. It's not so easy. Be patient, take a few swings, and, wait on the Lord, but make yourself available. God, I'm here and I'm willing. And I think he can really work with a heart like that.
Yeah, and understanding that many times callings are for a season, and we have the work of trying to hear and discern God's calling, but then even when we do, oftentimes it's not necessarily a long-term or permanent calling. It's something seasonal, and we continue to have to, as you said, James, stay on our toes and continue to listen and adapt and to kind of have our hands open on this journey of life. And so, James and Daniella, thank you so much again for taking the time to be here with us. Thank you for just sharing your hearts and for having a posture of humility and listening for God's call in your life and how he wants to use you and where your gifts and passions and skills can intersect to bring about the new creation that he is on mission to create in all of us and will one day fully finish in Jesus. So thank you so much again for being here on Unpolished. Please like and subscribe, share this with a friend if it's been helpful. We'll see you on the next episode.